Hello and welcome to Faultlines on NDTV. I'm Gaurie, Dwivedi, and this is a show where we decode the truth beneath the headlines and beyond the divide. Today, the first story we are taking is the Russia-Ukraine conflict entering a new and deadly phase, the dawn of robot warfare, where drones pull the trigger and AI decides who will live and who dies. The battlefield is evolving. It's no longer soldier versus soldier, viewers. It's machine versus machine. And later, it's a battle of tradition and spirituality versus power and dominance, one with huge geopolitical consequences. The Dalai Lama has ruled out Chinese role in his reincarnation process. This has irked Beijing, which will have none of it, determined that to end the movement fighting for the rights of Tibetans. What remains? Well, thousands of lives in limbo and India in the eye of this escalating storm. But first up, our big story and the first story on Faultlines. Viewers, the rules of the battlefield are changing. It's 2025 and the Russia-Ukraine war has now morphed into unlike anything else that you've seen so far. And something only seen in science fiction, from Ukraine's audacious Operation Spiderweb to Russia's largest aerial strikes on Ukraine this week. Both sides have upped the ante, and there are now autonomous drones that are raining destruction from above as relentless ground machines stalking the battlefield with merciless creations, reshaping the front lines. At a time when both sides are facing a massive human toll, robots are no longer just about saving lives, but also about sustaining a war with no end in sight whatsoever. This report dives into the chaos where cutting-edge technology meets the raw brutality of war.
Science fiction could soon become reality. The age of War 2.0 is here, the future of global warfare, battlefields gone digital, no more lives lost on the front lines, but rather swarms of drones guided by AI-driven algorithms who call the shots and pull the trigger. This week saw a major escalation in the Russia-Ukraine war, where Moscow hit Kyiv with its largest attack till date, all driven by drones. Russia hit Ukraine with 537 drones and missiles, destroying critical infrastructure while killing dozens. Ukraine did not take it lying back, launching its deepest strikes into Russia, again driven largely by drones, striking facilities 1,000 kilometers from the front lines. This latest assault highlights a new era, no longer soldier versus soldier, but machine versus machine. Cheaper and easier to produce than missiles, from kamikaze to reconnaissance drones, they are redefining the rules of warfare. Ukraine had developed a sizable drone industry, roughly 200 companies producing aerial drones, others producing land and sea-based unmanned vehicles. Ukrainian makers just delivered the first batch of 1,000 all-Ukrainian first-person view drones. But the most deadly amongst them is the feared Baba Yaga heavy drone bombers, capable of hitting moving targets with 250 kilograms munitions. Kyiv reportedly manufactured 30,000 such bomber drones last year. Yet, Moscow is not far behind. Russia is mass-producing attack drones at record rates, raining fear across Ukrainian cities. Reports suggest Moscow has launched nearly 20,500 attacks and decoy drones in 2025 so far, launching roughly 1,000 per week. Key weapons in Moscow's arsenal: the Shahid drone imported from Iran, adapted by Russia, capable of 40 kilograms of highly explosive payload. Drone pilots are now replacing soldiers as AI takes over the battlefield, a chilling glimpse into how wars may be fought in the future. The Russia-Ukraine conflict is no longer a battle for territory, but a testbed for the future of warfare. With Disha Bakchi, Bureau Report, NDTV World.
All right, viewers, the robot wars that are now going to redefine warfare is our first big story on the show. You heard the kind of damage that these drones can actually do with no humans involved. Let's put that out. Let's get you the comparison between the Russian and Ukrainian drones that are there and what is it that they are capable of. First and foremost, you can see the Ukrainian ones are small, they are light, they are close kill drones. The ones on the Russian side, they are largely the Iranian designed ones. They are loitering munitions. So let's move ahead. The other aspect of so they can carry 1 kg payload for 7 kilometers. As far as the Russian ones are concerned, they are suicide drones used to target infrastructure. So look at the kind of damage that some of these drones can actually inflict on enemies. The third aspect as far as the comparisons of the drone is concerned, let's move ahead and talk about the other aspect of this comparison, which is that the Russian ones, what they can is the Turkish long endurance UAVs, that is the Ukrainian ones, that's the Bayraktars, and on the Russian side you have the ones that can actually do long endurance UAVs that are there. Now let's put out some of the other comparisons that are there. They are used for precision strikes, and they are used for recce purposes and also for strike missions. Look at the amount of damage that these drones can do and how important robot warfare is now becoming as far as battleground, battlefield is concerned. The other key comparisons is between the payload that you can see and the distance that both of them can cover. Now let's move ahead and talk about some of the other aspects as far as this comparison is concerned. Murakha is one on the Ukrainian side, unmanned ground vehicle for combat support, and on the Russian side, a multifunctional unmanned ground vehicle that is both for recce purposes as well as for combat. The other comparison is it can carry over 500 kgs, difficult terrain that it can navigate, and on the Russian side you can see that 200 kgs is the payload. Let's move ahead and talk about the other third comparison point, which is it can resist Russian electronic warfare systems, and here it is equipped with both jammers and anti-drone cages. So this is the kind of highly sophisticated drone warfare that is now being deployed by Russia and Ukraine on both sides. And now let's talk about the aspect about who's really dominating. This is the graphic, this is the exact number that is most important, which is who's actually dominating this drone warfare. On the Ukrainian side, they have 300 targets that can be attacked simultaneously, long-range drones that are produced per day. And here on this side, you can see 100 long-range drones that are produced per day on the Ukrainian side. That was the Russian side. We flipped it here. On the Russian side, you can see the S-400 Triumph, which is amongst the most advanced air defense system. This is what is capable of stopping the warfare. As I said, there are two aspects. One is that you inflict maximum damage on the enemy. The second is that you have air defense systems that can actually stop from drone warfare to be having a massive impact on your own side of the battlefield. This is the comparison between the air defense systems. Patriot, that is the American missile system that Ukraine is working on, is less effective when compared to S-400, which is resilient in terms of electronic warfare. And here Patriot is intercepting tactical ballistic missiles, but only so much. So this is the comparison that we put out, viewers. And now let's quickly now get in a voice from London to talk more about which way is this drone warfare really headed. Barzeen Wakmar joins me live from London to talk more about this. Barzeen, thanks much for speaking to us on Faultlines. We're putting out how robot warfare is essentially now the latest and most important dimension of battlefield. In your assessment, where do you see drones and their importance going forward on ground, in battlefield, in conflicts like Russia-Ukraine's?
Drones are a feature here to stay, and increasingly so with advanced stealth technologies, no question about it, on both sides. And you mentioned in your report about the Shahid 136 drones, which have been rechristened as the Geran 2 by Russia, and now jointly produced also in Russia. Once upon a time, they were imported from Tehran, but now produced at the Alabuga Special Economic Zone. And what's interesting is that at the said zone, economic zone in question, there's also going to be a joint Sino-Russian logistics complex that is on the anvil. and is about to come up, so that we will witness even Chinese involvement in drone warfare and the Ukraine war at large, where we will see questions of new models such as the Garpia A1 and the Garpia 3 being rolled out as such.
Okay, all right.
But moving aside from that, on the geostrategic and international relations aspects, it should be pointed out that President Trump did mention at the Hague summit last week that Putin doesn't want peace. And that is a harbinger of things to come, in that he has, that is to say, Mr. Putin has finally, it would appear, alienated what was a Russophile president.
All right. Which brings me to ask you about, as far as drone warfare is concerned, for long-drawn conflicts like Russia-Ukraine, where at the end of the day, there's only so much of human toll that can be taken by any country, these drones can actually make you shift. The warfare, the conflict could actually take a very deadly and serious turn, because now you're not talking about human tolls, you're just talking about electronic warfare ensuring maximum damage, and that could mean that the conflict could go on longer than what many would imagine.
It could, and it could lead to increased attrition. And that is precisely what is happening, because it ties in with what is Russia's depletion and degradation of military advantage on the field. I mean, just consider the fact, since the war, Russia has lost 1 million, at least, 250,000 casualties, 21,500 armored fighting vehicles, 41,000 assaulted vehicles, 24,500 artillery pieces, and 370 aircraft, not to mention quite a significant dent also in its strategic nuclear bomber fleet. Then there's the question of the human element, although mechanics and drones and other sophisticated technologies come into it. Well, it does come to the picture when you consider what Russian conscripts are.
Right.
It is abysmal if one looks at the situation, because you have barely 18 and 19-year-olds who don't know how to clean their rifles. And that is a patent fact, even acknowledged by the Russians. This is not propaganda put out by the West. They have barely training for 1 or 2 weeks. And insofar as the tanks are concerned, the artillery, they do not even have time for basic tank training as joint platoons as such.
Right.
And they're just simply being thrown as fodder into the theater of war. And what about logistics going up to the front line?
Yes.
33% of Russian railway stock still is of Soviet vintage rolling stock.
Okay.
I mean, even after 30 plus years of the dissolution of the USSR.
Right. All right. So that's an important fact you're pointing out. Hopefully there'll be less cannon fodder, so to say, as far as people on both sides are concerned. Human toll could be less, and that could potentially mean more conflict going forward. Barzin Wagmar joining us live from London. Thanks much on that perspective. Viewers, bottom line as far as this aspect of warfare is concerned is that it's over 1,200 days since the war began. Russia has reportedly lost a third of its total armed forces. 1 million soldiers killed, severely depleting its troops. In Ukraine, 100,000 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed, maybe more, 10% of its total forces. One believes the number could be much higher than that. Both sides are struggling due to lack of troops and resources, making drones an alluring option. But the big question remains, at a time when the world is looking to end the war, which is already 3 years plus, both Kiev and Moscow are looking at ways to extend this conflict, with the drone industry thriving, racing to make the perfect killing machines, cheap and easy to mass produce. Drones ensure that this war could go on indefinitely, stalling true stocks further, making weapons manufacturers richer. Moreover, drone usage has also caused significantly more civilian casualties on both Russian and Ukrainian side, where algorithms choose targets and autonomous machines shoot indiscriminately, while innovation is ensuring less soldiers are killed on the battlefield. A never-ending war could only mean more devastation, more instability, more destruction for the world going forward. All right, viewers, I'm going to slip into a very short break. We come back on the other side of Faultlines, talk more about why is it that the next Dalai Lama, the choosing of it, the reincarnation of it is so important for China, and where does that put India in the middle of this power play? We come back and decode Dalai Lama versus China, our second story on Faultlines. Stay with us. Viewers, welcome back to Faultlines. The second story we are addressing today, this week on the show, is the Tibetan issue. A landmass that's almost 25% of China. 25% of that is actually Tibet. Annexed by Mao Zedong a year after he founded the People's Republic of China in 1949. The fault line that runs deep in the region has once again been brought to fore by the issue of succession, with His Holiness making it clear that the tradition of Tibetan Buddhists having a Dalai Lama will continue, and that the 15th Dalai Lama will be chosen by Tibetans, not by the Chinese Communist Party. Viewers, since 1950, this region has been under the Chinese occupation, under Chinese control, complete subjugation. This report tells you why the fight for the Tibetan soul is far from over, and why Beijing is getting sleepless nights over who gets to decide the 15th Dalai Lama. Take a look.
A spiritual battle with geopolitical consequences, as the Dalai Lama firmly rejects China's authority over his reincarnation. In a rare and bold move, the Tibetan spiritual leader has dismissed China's claim to control his reincarnation. A centuries-old Tibetan tradition is now at the center of a modern geopolitical storm. And this storm could redraw spiritual borders and reignite old wounds between India and China. The tensions began in 1950. The People's Liberation Army marched into Tibet, calling it a peaceful liberation. But for Tibetans, it was the beginning of an occupation. In 1959, amid a failed uprising, the Dalai Lama fled to India, finding refuge in Dharamshala. Since then, China has tightened its grip on the region, suppressing Tibetan culture, language, and religion. And now China wants to control the future of Tibetan Buddhism itself. Beijing insists the next Dalai Lama must be born in China and approved by the Communist Party. Many questions are being asked. Could there be two Dalai Lamas in the future, one recognized by Tibetans in exile and another anointed by Beijing? Analysts warn this spiritual rift could spark a legitimacy crisis, and the ripple effects could reach Indian shores. Experts suggest that Tibetan exiles in India offer a leverage and buffer to India vis-à-vis China's influence in the Himalayan region. A divided Dalai Lama would test that balance. Two Dalai Lamas, one a symbol of resilience and exile, the other a product of Chinese power projection. As this spiritual succession turns political, India finds itself in the eye of an ancient and escalating storm. This is no ordinary reincarnation. This is a new flashpoint in the India-China rivalry. Bureau Report for NDTV World.
So this is the history of this entire issue. But why is it that China actually wants to have its own Dalai Lama? Why does it matter so much? Let's explain that, because that tells you the deepest fault line that runs in that region. Why is it that China wants to appoint the 15th Dalai Lama? First, a pliable Dalai Lama will not ask for autonomy. As I said, 25% of Chinese landmass is actually Tibet, something that has been under subjugation of Chinese control since 1950. And since then, call for autonomy, self-governance haven't ended. A pliable Dalai Lama would mean an end to that completely. Second, no demand for separate Tibetan identity. Tibetan culture, Tibetan identity, Tibetan language, all of that, the urge to preserve it, to ensure that that remains as it is still there. But a Dalai Lama that is completely aligned to the CCP will not have any such inclination whatsoever, and that erasure of Tibetan identity will be so important for the CCP. And this is something that could be from a language point of view, food, culture, libraries, all of which, a large part of that, remember, was stamped out during the Cultural Revolution in China and during the 60s, the decade-long Cultural Revolution, but a lot of that still remains, which is why China wants to have its own Dalai Lama. The other part, it will be seen, that Dalai Lama will be seen as a CCP agent. He will be an extension of the thought process of the Chinese Communist Party, and that will mean that a large part of the Tibetan separatist movement that the CCP views is going to end on its own, which is why this is so important. And lastly, it will not, the Dalai Lama that will be anointed by the Communist Party of China will not have the authority to actually mobilize and teach Tibetans anything about their spirituality. So this figure will not stand tall amongst Tibetan Buddhists around the world, which is why it is so important for China to actually appoint. And they've done so. They've done so in the past, twice the Panchen Lamas that were appointed, but then that have been rejected by Buddhists and Tibetan Buddhists around the world. But that is a call that China wants to do all over again, and which is why we pointed out why this is so important. Now viewers, the bottom line as far as this issue is concerned is that choosing the next Dalai Lama is not just about the next spiritual leader of the Tibetan people. It is much more than that. Dalai Lama is the guide, philosopher, or bodhisattva of the Tibetan people. Bodhisattva is the one who is an epitome of compassion, knowledge, and spirituality, fountainhead of their thought, someone whose word can and does rally Tibetans world over. And it is this scenario that China is most worried about. 3 generations of Tibetans have lived in exile, many of them in India and elsewhere, with most having little expectations that their land will once again become theirs. But what many still harbor is the thought of having some sort of self-governance, some autonomy, something that the Chinese Communist Party has been able to stamp out with brutal force till now. A 15th Dalai Lama that is young, dynamic, and a fiery orator will be able to create a momentum that will make the CCP look weak. And that is the big fear in Chongnanhai. Well, as for India, it houses the largest number of Tibetans outside of Tibet, and the Tibetan government in exile, working since 1960, that was recognized by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. And that's a leverage that Beijing knows only too well that India has and retains over it as far as the Himalayan region is concerned. All right, viewers, that brings us to the end of this edition of Faultlines. Thanks so much for watching. We come back next week with another edition telling you once again the fault lines that exist around the world. Thanks so much for watching this episode.